And frankly, I want to say, never, to the best of my knowledge, has this kind of activity brought any kind of understanding or reconciliation. The understanding and reconciliation occurs eventually at the negotiating table. And unfortunately, not enough women have been central to the negotiating process in the Israeli-Palestinian talks. Many of us believe that if there were more female representation, the results would be otherwise. I'm saying this because I want to bring you one set of statistics. Today, earlier today, the Center for Women in the Public Sphere at the Van Leer Institute launched our 2014 Gender Inequality Index at the Knesset, and so my mind is full of numbers. But I want to give you one of the most telling statistics of all. In systematic, consistent, persistent studies of political attitudes, political trends, and voter preferences in Israel, conducted by the Israel National Electoral Survey at Tel Aviv University by Professor Michal Shamir, we have found something that may perhaps augur a different direction. When a random sample of the entire Israeli population was asked, which of the following 4 guiding principles is the most important to you? These were the results. For women, the most important value, 40% of women claimed that peace is the most important value. 40%. Only 25, little under 25% of men. The second value in importance for women was democracy, over 27%. If you take peace and democracy together, over 2/3 of women in Israel believe that peace and democracy are the leading values that guide them, guide their political preferences, and should guide this country. Men thought, only 24% of men thought that democracy was most important, and I won't hold you in suspense. Close to 40% of men thought that the most important value was a Jewish state. Less than 24% of women. And the last value that was examined was a greater land of Israel, which leads in directly to what we're talking about. And here, by the way, the overall figures were negligible, but once again, almost 10% men and maybe 6% women. Look, there is a broad constituency for peace and democracy in this country. It has been proven not once, but time and again, totally consistent over the past decade, and it has not been given sufficient expression. And if you're looking for the logic and the rationale of this evening and tomorrow's conference, it lies precisely here, in the desire to give legitimation for women's voices and women's perspectives, and most significantly, for women's participation in the resolution of the conflict. So we're delighted, truly, to have 3 such terrific women and very polite ones, because they've allowed me to blabber on, to speak with us this evening. I will introduce them in the order that they will speak. Each one will speak 20 minutes. Some of them know that I am a very hard taskmaster in terms of time. Our first speaker will be Advocate Hiba Husseini, from a very old Jerusalem, East Jerusalem family. Hiba Husseini has been the legal advisor for the Palestinian negotiating team for many years. I think it takes a lot of courage to come to West Jerusalem today, so I'd like to welcome her in particular and thank her for coming. Gabriela Shalev, Professor Gabriela Shalev, is president of the Kiryat Ono Academic College. She was a colleague for many years at the Hebrew University in the School of Law, and as many of you know well, she was Israel's first and only woman ambassador to the United Nations, and she made the effort to come from Tel Aviv, which is also demands a lot of thankfulness, so thank you, Gabi, for coming. And the third speaker and the last speaker, who I am meeting at this moment, is Professor Natalie Hudson, who comes to us. Professor Hudson has been an advisor to UN Women. She's a scholar of issues of women and peace. We're delighted to have you with us. She only came from Dayton, Ohio, but you can welcome her as well. So without further ado, Hiba Husseini, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you, notwithstanding the moment's difficulties. Unfortunately, I am not an expert on women's issues, and therefore I will not be addressing my issues from that perspective entirely. I will be able to impart to you my experience as a woman who's been involved in negotiations in my capacity as a legal advisor. And then I'll focus very quickly on the core issues from a Palestinian perspective. I thought it might be relevant for me to share with you what we, all of us actually, to a large extent, I can't overgeneralize, of course, but most of us in the mainstream believe to be the core issues and how we look at them, and how complex the issues become when it gets to the issues related to border sovereignty, Jerusalem, and so forth and so on. I joined the Palestinian negotiations team in 1994. I became an advisor and a drafter to the Cairo Agreement, to the Interim Agreement, and a host of other agreements leading up to Camp David. I participated in the negotiations as an advisor and again as a legal drafter. Continued to be involved post Camp David into the proximity talks and then the Annapolis process, and to a lesser extent in the most recent attempt at resumption of negotiations. I'm in charge of the legal committee, so most issues that fall outside of the technical issues are my issues. So it's a very large portfolio. I'm the only female, I would say, that has participated in the negotiations from the outset onwards, and outset from the date of my participation. So it was a very, very difficult process for me to be taken seriously initially. But with tenacity, with perseverance, and with continued tolerance, if you will, of the male behavior around me in terms of not wanting an opinion from a woman, you know, and a young one. I was very young at the time compared to all the PLO members who were participating. I was a 30-year-old who's really coming in from after having studied in the U.S. and so forth. So it was on the one hand, I had to really teach my colleagues how to accept my advice and how to listen to me and how to work with me. And eventually I think it's your seriousness and your command of the issues, and it was amazing afterwards. It was very smooth, and until today it has been very smooth in terms of their receptivity and the taking advice. It doesn't go along for everybody. It's a responsibility, I think, that falls on the shoulders of a woman to really make it work and happen for herself, because we don't have a clear decision by the Palestinian leadership to have women included. So it was a level of professionalism that I had to impart, and a command of the subjects and the issues that they really needed, and that they would eventually start relying on, rather than their awareness of the issue, rather than their decision to include women and so forth. So, and until today, I continue to participate, and I continue to be called on for my professional input and professional advice. So without further ado, let me get into the quick core issues, because I know we have limited time. As you very well know, we all have the core issues and the obstacles that are associated with each one of those issues. Again, you know them all: Jerusalem, refugees, territory. Sovereignty is becoming a more of a core issue at this juncture, end of claims, and those of course are not listed in the same manner in the Declaration of Principles, but those are where Palestinian thinking, of course I'm making a Palestinian presentation here, so this is where core Palestinian issues lie. With respect to Jerusalem, our position, and if you talk to many Palestinians, this would be the position: two capitals for two states. We're looking at a certain arrangement for the old city, especially with respect to the holy sites and so forth. Refugees is a very, very big issue. Continues to be a core for Palestinians, given the large number of refugees, not only in the territory in Palestine, and even in East Jerusalem we have a refugee camp, the Anata refugee camp. Then you get to Ramallah, Nablus, you get to Bethlehem, and of course the Gaza situation, and then you move on to the host countries in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. We all know what is going on, Iraq, and we know what happened there. Territory, our position, as you very well know it, is the 67 borders with swaps. How that would be determined is going to be a question of negotiations. And definitely the link to Gaza, the West Bank Gaza link, sovereignty over land, sea, natural resources, air for commercial traffic. Of course, as many of you know, we have agreed that we would be demilitarized as a state. How that would unfold in terms of the defense, security issues is going to be something for negotiations. But you can't detract from your sovereignty over those issues, because then you detract from your the rights associated with it. And of course, we both, as we negotiate, we both seek to end the claims as we want to end the conflict. So it's going to have to be a full, comprehensive settlement to address all the claims and the issues. On Jerusalem, as you very well know, I mean, we have different Jerusalems in terms of definition. We have the old city, we have the municipal borders, how were they expanded to how far they go, where they have been altered and so forth and so on. But again, all issues can be negotiated if there's the will and the power to negotiate and find a solution that is acceptable to the sides and that would meet the needs of the two populations, because they need to live side by side, especially in Jerusalem. We continue to maintain our position with respect to Jerusalem and rely on international resolutions as enunciated in the UN Security Council resolutions, and there you have them listed. And those principles, the reason those Security Council resolutions are important for us is because they give us a point of departure, and they allow us to negotiate our position from an international territorial issue where land that was taken by force would have to be returned and so forth and so on, again subject to negotiations. If we don't rely on those resolutions from our perspective as Palestinians, then what we're doing is that we're ignoring our connection to Jerusalem, because then if we don't have a point of departure. We don't accept, of course, the Israeli official policies and positions and the legal, of course, annexation as a point of departure for negotiations. Those are facts on the ground in terms of the annexation, in terms of the extension of Israeli law to East Jerusalem. As a Jerusalemite, I live here and I experience the implications of that, but as a negotiations position, that's not going to be where I would start from. For those of you who would like to have a refresher, here's a map in terms of the municipal boundaries before and after 67, even during the 50s, how it was and before, but I'm not going to elaborate much. We also believe that we have, why do we have these obstacles in terms of the final status of Jerusalem? And of course, I'm oversimplifying here considerably, is because even what is going on today in Jerusalem in terms of expansion of the Israeli, we call them settlements into East Jerusalem, but it's the neighborhoods. They violate even the Oslo Accords themselves, because Oslo Accords maintained that there would be the status quo would be maintained, and the status quo has not been maintained. And I can see that as a resident. I can see it as a person who lives in Sheikh Jarrah, and what is happening to Sheikh Jarrah, what is happening to Ras Al Amoud area and Tur and so forth and so on. And that is also associated with certain practices. Here they are listed, but they're on the minds of every Palestinian who resides in the city, especially with respect to maintaining their residency, and especially with respect to the fear they live under, that if I don't maintain residency here according to Israeli law, then that has been extended over to me, which I don't believe in the first place, but I will lose my residency. And it will take, I mean, they do whatever it takes to maintain their residency for fear of the revocation and so forth. And then you also have, of course, as we all know it, the restrictions for the West Bankers, not to mention Gazans who cannot access East Jerusalem at all, except with certain permits and with limited numbers and visitation rights. I give you an example. I have a young attorney in my office because I'm a practicing lawyer. I'm a practicing business lawyer for a full-time job, who's 28. He got a permit just a few weeks ago, and he visited Jerusalem. It was his first time ever as a 28. You know, he's never been allowed to enter. He's never qualified for a permit before. So it was an amazing experience for this young attorney of 25, and he has a refugee status, lives in Al-Am'ari camp, in the Qalandia camp, forgive me. So first time ever crossing Qalandia, even, you know, just the concept of crossing, the concept of moving to East Jerusalem, going to East Jerusalem, so forth. So those are the kinds of things that the Palestinians live with, and that constantly hamper their thinking. So the unification concept, that is the current policy of the current government and previous governments to unify Jerusalem, is not a position that Palestinians can live with. As a resident of the city, and despite all of its difficulties and so forth, I wouldn't want to be an Israeli citizen living under Israeli rules in a unified city. I would prefer to have an open city, everybody having visitation rights, but I would be a Palestinian residing in East Jerusalem with a Palestinian passport. That would be my preference, for example. And I won't be the only one. You speak to all generations, from the eldest to the youngest, and who are currently in Jerusalem, aside from those who, for practical reasons, obtained Israeli citizenship, because we do have a good number that have obtained Israeli citizenship. But those are our aspirations, and this is what we want. Refugees is the second topic, and we will probably differ substantially on the numbers, on the concepts, because of how we calculate. This is a core issue in the negotiations, in terms of where do we start counting and how do we count and what generations of refugees we count. I put before you here the Palestinian position. The numbers are from when an Israeli looks at them, especially in negotiations, they're staggering because they're very large. But from our calculations, based on UNRWA records, on our own records, those are the numbers. 7 million is a very large number. Can be disputed, of course, but the basis for the calculation of the numbers is established. Now, do we agree with it or not? That's another story, another issue, and how we eventually will negotiate the number of those who will return, and where they will return to, agreeing to begin with on the definition of the right of return, if it's something that can be acceptable in the final status arrangement, plus how we can utilize the host countries in terms of accepting to turn some of these refugees into residents. How would we move other refugees to yet third countries to accept them, and so forth, would be something for the negotiations. But the core issue, am I running out of time completely? I'm slow. Okay. Is the right of return and the repatriation. So let me move to skip. I had one slide on refugees, so territory. Let's see how I should focus this. I think the most important thing for us is, from a Palestinian perspective, is to be viable with the territory. Because we've accepted the concept of swaps, we've recognized the large settlement blocks. What we want is to have territory that is viable, that is somehow contiguous, and that we can have a territorial link with the Gaza Strip, between the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and of course inclusive of East Jerusalem, however it is eventually defined. This is another map. Many of you know it, see it. Of course, this is a Palestinian map. You may, but I think the facts are the facts. But it really, the way the settlements, the way the borders are with the wall are being constructed, and how things are being translated on the ground, is something that is really difficult for us to absorb, swallow, and it is really affecting Palestinian confidence and eroding the confidence in terms of the negotiations. Sovereignty, as I said initially, sovereignty is very important for us. It's associated, of course, with the land, it's associated with the rights, but without full sovereignty exercised in a two-state situation, where we control our land, sea, air, and natural resources, we control our borders, then any detraction from that would be detraction from sovereignty, and therefore it becomes an issue that when associated with the fact that we have accepted a demilitarized state, to detract even further with respect to water, to electromagnetic spectrum and so forth, it really, from our perspective, nullifies Palestinian sovereignty. Let me move on to the end of claims, because that's going to be also, and this is an issue that I actually handled directly myself in the discussions when we're in full gear. What are the damages? What is the compensation? How do we address the issue of not only compensation for refugees, which is part of the refugee file, and how we compensate them, repatriate them, and what kind of monetary damages we award to the refugees. We also have a calculation for the end of claims in respect of the occupation of 67, resulting from the damage to the territory. I'm moving rather quickly. Damages to the environment, the natural resources, cultural property. There are, under international law, you'll find damages awarded for the violation of humanitarian rights and so forth. And those are all heads of damages and claims that we are looking at. We rely in our principles to require damages on international law, like the Hague Convention, state responsibility, UN basic principles on repatriation, and so forth and so on. On a final note, to go back to the issue of today, really, which is the women in negotiations. As I started at the outset, we haven't really worked as a Palestinian team on including women, and I know that we, as myself, I mean, we approach negotiations differently than men, and we approach the core, even the rights issue differently than men do, and we even among ourselves internally as a Palestinian team, how do the men approach it and how do the women approach it? And there are very few of us. I mean, for me, it's been a rather lonely trip, if you will, because I don't have many women there with me to even discuss the issues from that kind of a perspective. So we tend to overlook it. We tend to underestimate the power that women can bring to the settlement, and men tend, from a Palestinian, the way the Palestinian men look at it, it's all territory, it's all right or wrong, mine, it's Israel is wrong, I am right, or vice versa. It's mine or theirs. And so when you approach things with that perspective, you tend to overlook a lot of the details that would have permitted you to reach a compromise. And I think Palestinian men in the negotiations would benefit dramatically if we had increased the number of women on our team and given them even greater role, and we would have given them the power and empowered them to participate more effectively. Thank you for listening, and sorry for taking so much time.